The headlights cut through the darkness like two pale eyes searching for prey. It was February 2001, and somewhere on a lonely road in County Carlow, Ireland, a woman was fighting for her life in the back of a car. She didn't know that her desperate struggle against the man who had taken her would eventually expose one of the most terrifying predators in Irish criminal history. She didn't know that her survival would be the key that unlocked a door to horrors that stretched back years. All she knew was that if she stopped fighting, she would die in those woods, and she was right. But here's what makes this story different from any other you've heard. This isn't just about a monster. This is about the women who were silenced, the families who were destroyed, and ultimately about one survivor whose courage would bring down a killer who'd hunted in plain sight for years. This is the story of Larry Murphy, the man they would come to call the Hunter in the Woods. I need you to stay with me through every chapter of this story, because what happens at the end changes everything you think you know about justice, about evil, and about the incredible resilience of human beings who refuse to be victims. If this story moves you, if it makes you think differently about the world around you, I'm asking you right now to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because stories like this deserve to be told, and survivors deserve to have their voices heard. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Larry Murphy was born in 1964 in County Kildare, Ireland. On the surface, he was everything a small Irish community could want in a neighbor. He was a carpenter by trade, skilled with his hands, known for quality work that he performed throughout the Wicklow and Carlow regions. He married young, had children, attended Mass like everyone else in his village. His wife believed she had found a good man. His neighbors believed they lived next to a hard-working family man. Everyone believed the mask he wore so carefully, so perfectly, for so many years. But masks have a way of slipping, don't they? And the darkness that Larry Murphy carried inside him was too vast, too hungry to stay hidden forever. To understand what happened on that February night in 2001, we need to understand the landscape that Larry Murphy moved through. Ireland in the 1990s was changing rapidly. The economic boom known as the Celtic Tiger was transforming cities and towns, bringing prosperity and hope. But out in the rural areas, in the winding country roads that cut through forests and farmland, life moved at an older pace. People trusted their neighbors. Women hitchhiked without fear. Doors remained unlocked. It was this trust, this beautiful Irish innocence, that a predator like Larry Murphy exploited with devastating efficiency. The roads around Wicklow and Carlow are unlike any others in Ireland. They wind through some of the most beautiful and most isolated countryside in the entire nation. Forests stretch for miles in every direction. Pull off onto any number of unmarked paths, and you could disappear completely from the modern world. For most people, this was the appeal of the region, the natural beauty, the sense of escape from the pressures of city life. For Larry Murphy, these woods represented something else entirely. They were his hunting ground. I've walked some of those roads while researching this story. During the day, they're stunning. All dappled sunlight and ancient trees and the kind of quiet that soothes the soul. But at night, the transformation is absolute. The darkness in those woods is the kind of darkness that swallows everything. No streetlights, no houses for miles. Just the trees, the silence, and the knowledge that if something happened to you out here, no one would hear you scream. Larry Murphy knew these woods intimately. He worked construction jobs throughout the region, which gave him perfect cover to scout locations, to learn which roads were traveled and which were forgotten, to identify the perfect places where a crime could be committed without any witnesses. He was patient. He was methodical. And according to investigators who would later study his case, he was almost certainly active for years before anyone knew his name. The first public hint that something was wrong in the Irish countryside came not from Murphy's eventual capture, but from a series of disappearances that haunted investigators throughout the 1990s. Women were vanishing from the southeastern corner of Ireland, and no one could explain why. The cases seemed unconnected at first. Different locations, different circumstances, different victim profiles. But as the years passed and the list of missing women grew longer, a terrible pattern began to emerge. Annie McCarrick was an American student studying in Ireland who disappeared in March 1993 after reportedly heading to the Wicklow Mountains. She was 26 years old, full of life, beloved by everyone who knew her. She simply vanished, as if the mountains had swallowed her whole. Despite massive searches, despite international attention, despite the desperate pleas of her family, Annie was never found. Jo Dullard was a 21-year-old woman who disappeared in November 1995 while hitchhiking home from Dublin. She made a phone call from a payphone in Moon, County Kildare, telling a friend that a car had stopped for her. It was the last time anyone heard her voice. Her body has never been recovered. Fiona Pender was a 25-year-old expectant mother who vanished from her home in Tullamore in August 1996. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. She and her unborn child simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a family shattered by grief and desperate for answers that would never come. Ciara Breen was 17 years old when she disappeared from her home in Dundalk in February 1997. She left in the middle of the night and was never seen again. Her mother spent the rest of her life searching for answers, dying without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Fiona Sinnott was a 19-year-old mother who vanished from County Wexford in February 1998. She left behind a young daughter and a family who have never stopped looking for her. Deirdre Jacob was an 18-year-old who disappeared in broad daylight in July 1998 while walking the short distance from her home to the local shop in Newbridge, County Kildare. She was seen by multiple witnesses walking along the road, and then she was simply gone. 6 women, 6 families destroyed, 6 cases that seemed to defy explanation. Irish authorities formed a task force to investigate what they believed might be connected disappearances. But the investigation produced more questions than answers. Were these women victims of the same predator? Were multiple killers operating in the same region? Or were these simply tragic coincidences, unrelated cases that only seemed connected because of their geographic proximity? The detectives working these cases knew in their hearts that they were hunting a serial offender. The pattern was too clear, too consistent. Young women traveling alone, disappearing without a trace in a concentrated area of Ireland. This was the work of someone who knew the terrain, someone who could move through this region undetected, someone who had perfected the art of abduction and disposal. But knowing something and proving it are two entirely different things. And without bodies, without witnesses, without any physical evidence, the investigation stalled. The families of the missing women watched helplessly as years passed with no resolution. the people of Ireland began to fear their own countryside, wondering what kind of monster walked among them. Little did anyone know that the monster was hiding in plain sight, raising his children, attending church, working his construction jobs, and waiting for his next opportunity. Larry Murphy continued his life as if nothing was wrong, because as far as he knew, nothing was wrong. He was untouchable. He was invisible. He was the perfect predator. But no one stays invisible forever. February 11th, 2001. The date that would mark the beginning of the end for Larry Murphy, though he didn't know it yet. The weather that night was typical for an Irish February, cold, damp, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes you long for the warmth of home. For one young woman making her way home from an evening out in Carlow Town, the night seemed unremarkable, routine, safe. She was in her late 20s, strong, independent, with no reason to believe that this night would be any different from hundreds of others. She had made this journey before. She knew these roads. She trusted in the basic decency of her fellow human beings, as most Irish people did in those days, before the full horror of Larry Murphy became known. What happened next would change her life forever, but it would also set in motion a chain of events that would finally give a name and a face to the evil that had been stalking the Irish countryside for years. I'm not going to share the specific details of what Larry Murphy did to this woman that night. Out of respect for her privacy and her healing, I will tell you only what became public through the court proceedings. What matters is that she was abducted, that she was subjected to a horrific assault, and that Larry Murphy fully intended to kill her when he was finished. He drove her to the Wicklow Gap, a remote mountainous area that he clearly knew well. This was his killing ground, the place where he believed he could commit murder without any possibility of detection. The darkness was absolute. The isolation was complete. There were no houses nearby, no passing traffic, no possibility of rescue. Larry Murphy believed he had chosen the perfect victim and the perfect location. He believed that he would add another name to his invisible list of conquests. He believed that this young woman would simply disappear, like so many others before her, and that the mystery would never be solved. He was wrong. What Larry Murphy failed to account for was the extraordinary courage of his intended victim. Despite everything she had endured, despite the terror and the pain and the hopelessness of her situation, she refused to surrender. She fought. Even when fighting seemed pointless, even when escape seemed impossible, she continued to resist. Her survival instinct was stronger than his desire to destroy her, and that made all the difference. But her courage alone might not have been enough to save her life. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Two men were out hunting that night in the Wicklow Gap. Their names were Trevor Moody and Kenneth Jones, and they would become unlikely heroes in this story. They were spotlighting for foxes, using high-powered flashlights to scan the countryside, when they noticed something unusual. A car parked in an isolated location. Movement nearby that didn't make sense. As they approached, their flashlight beams revealed a scene of horror. Larry Murphy had tied the young woman's hands behind her back with her own tights. He had placed a plastic bag over her head. He was in the process of suffocating her when the two hunters arrived. Kenneth Jones would later describe the moment in court. He saw Murphy on top of the woman, saw her struggling, saw the bag on her head. In that instant, He knew exactly what he was witnessing. He shouted, alerting Murphy to their presence, and then he gave chase when Murphy fled into the woods. Trevor Moody stayed with the victim, removing the bag from her head, untying her hands, saving her life. She was barely conscious, moments away from death. If the hunters had arrived even a few minutes later, she would have joined the ranks of Ireland's missing women. Another unsolved mystery, another family destroyed. Meanwhile, Kenneth Jones pursued Larry Murphy through the darkness of the Wicklow woods. Murphy knew this terrain, but fear had made him careless. Jones tackled him, bringing him down in a struggle that ended with Murphy in custody. The hunter had become the hunted. When the Gardaí arrived on scene, they found a crime in progress, a victim who had nearly been murdered, and a suspect who would soon become the most infamous criminal in modern Irish history. Larry Murphy was arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. But even as detectives celebrated the capture of a dangerous predator, questions began to multiply. Murphy's familiarity with the Wicklow Gap suggested he had been there before. His calm demeanor during the assault, his methodical approach to the crime, his obvious intention to dispose of the body, all of it pointed to a man who had done this before, perhaps many times. The investigation into Larry Murphy's background began in earnest. Detectives started mapping his movements over the years, comparing his known locations with the disappearances of the women who had vanished from this region. What they found chilled them to the bone. Larry Murphy had worked construction jobs throughout County Wicklow, County Carlow, and County Kildare throughout the 1990s. His work brought him to areas remarkably close to where several of the missing women had last been seen. He was familiar with the isolated roads and hidden paths that crisscrossed the region. He owned vehicles that could travel these areas undetected. He had opportunity, he had means, and based on what he had just done, he clearly had the motive. But here's the question that haunted investigators then and haunts us still today. How many victims did Larry Murphy claim before that night in February 2001? Was he responsible for the disappearances of Annie McCarrick, Jo Dullard, Fiona Pender, Ciara Breen, Fiona Sinnott, and Deirdre Jacob? Were there others, women whose disappearances were never reported or never connected to this pattern? I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. In your own life, how often do you truly see the people around you? Do we really know our neighbors, our co-workers, the person we pass on the street every day? Larry Murphy fooled everyone who knew him, his wife, his children, his community. He wore the mask of normalcy so perfectly that no one suspected the monster underneath. When you think about the people in your own life, could you imagine any of them hiding such darkness? Leave a comment below and tell me what you think about this. I believe our answers reveal something important about how we view the world and the people in it. The Gardaí conducted extensive searches of areas connected to Larry Murphy, hoping to find evidence that would link him to the missing women. They searched forests, fields, bogs, and mountainsides. They brought in cadaver dogs and archaeological experts. They followed every tip, investigated every lead, pursued every possibility. But the Irish countryside keeps its secrets well. The forests of Wicklow are vast and ancient. The bogs of the Midlands have been swallowing things for thousands of years. If Larry Murphy had disposed of bodies in these areas, finding them would require either precise knowledge of the locations or extraordinary luck. Larry Murphy wasn't talking. From the moment of his arrest, he maintained a posture of cold silence. He provided no information about his past activities. He expressed no remorse for his crime. He simply retreated behind a wall of legal procedure and waited for the system to process him. His trial took place in October 2001, just 8 months after his arrest. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Eyewitness testimony from the hunters, physical evidence from the scene, the surviving victim's harrowing account of her ordeal. Murphy's defense was minimal, focused on technical legal arguments rather than any claim of innocence. The verdict was never in doubt. Larry Murphy was convicted of kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, the maximum available under Irish law at the time. To many observers, the sentence seemed inadequate given the severity of Murphy's crimes and the strong suspicion that he had claimed other victims. 15 years for attempted murder, for the destruction of a young woman's sense of safety and security, for the terror that had gripped an entire region. It felt like a slap in the face to the families of the missing women who believed Murphy held answers about their loved ones. But the sentence was the sentence, and the legal system had spoken. Larry Murphy was transported to Arbor Hill Prison in Dublin, where he would spend the next decade and a half among Ireland's most dangerous offenders. The question was whether justice would stop there, or whether the truth about Murphy's full crimes would eventually come to light. While Larry Murphy sat in his prison cell, the families of Ireland's missing women continued their lonely vigil. They had watched the trial with desperate hope, believing that perhaps Murphy would be questioned about their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. Perhaps he would confess. Perhaps he would finally give them answers. Instead, they received nothing. Murphy's silence extended to all matters beyond his convicted crime. He acknowledged nothing, admitted nothing, volunteered nothing, and without a confession or physical evidence linking him to the disappearances, the Gardaí could not charge him with additional crimes. I want to take you into the world of these families now because their story is as important as Murphy's, if not more so. Understanding what they endured helps us understand why this case continues to resonate more than 2 decades later. Annie McCarrick's parents, John and Nancy, never stopped searching for their daughter. They traveled from New York to Ireland countless times, walking the trails Annie had loved, talking to anyone who might have information, keeping her memory alive through sheer force of will. John McCarrick died in 2009 without ever learning what happened to his daughter. Nancy continued the search alone, her grief compounded by the cruelty of uncertainty. The torture of not knowing is something most of us will never fully understand. When someone dies, there is grief, tremendous and overwhelming. But there is also closure. There is a body to bury, a grave to visit, a defined moment when life ended. For the families of missing persons, none of this exists. Instead, there is an endless loop of hope and despair, the wondering that never stops, the question that has no answer. Jo Dullard's family had to watch as the years passed with no resolution. Her sister Mary Phelan became one of Ireland's most vocal advocates for missing persons, refusing to let Jo be forgotten, demanding that the Gardaí continue investigating, insisting that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened. She died without finding Jo, passing the torch of advocacy to the next generation of the family. Fiona Pender's mother, Josephine, spent every day of her remaining life hoping for news about her daughter and unborn grandchild. She created a garden of remembrance, maintained a room exactly as Fiona had left it, lived in a state of suspended grief that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The not knowing ate away at her, but it also gave her strength. As long as Fiona hadn't been found, there was still hope. That hope sustained her until her death. These families formed an unlikely community, bound together by the worst possible shared experience. They supported each other through anniversaries and setbacks, through false leads and dashed hopes. They became advocates for the missing, pushing for reforms in how Ireland handled such cases, ensuring that their loved ones' names would not be forgotten. Larry Murphy's conviction brought them no peace because it brought them no answers. They knew that the man in Arbor Hill prison probably held the key to their questions. They knew that he could end their torment with a few words, a few coordinates, a few admissions. And they knew that he had chosen to remain silent, adding psychological torture to whatever physical crimes he had committed. The psychological profile of Larry Murphy began to take shape during his imprisonment. Forensic psychologists who studied his case identified him as a classic organized predator, highly intelligent, methodical in his crimes, capable of maintaining a convincing facade of normalcy. His selection of victims, young women traveling alone, suggested careful planning. His disposal strategy, targeting remote woodland areas, indicated intimate knowledge of the terrain and a long-term commitment to avoiding detection. What the psychologists couldn't determine was why Murphy had become what he was. His childhood, by all available accounts, was unremarkable. He hadn't suffered the abuse or neglect that sometimes correlates with violent criminal behavior. He showed no obvious signs of mental illness that might explain his actions. He simply was what he was, a monster who had learned to hide among ordinary people. In prison, Murphy was reportedly a model inmate. He followed rules, avoided confrontation, caused no problems for guards or administrators. This behavior pattern fit his profile perfectly. Murphy was a man who understood how to navigate social systems, how to present himself in ways that would benefit him. In prison, that meant keeping his head down and earning privileges. In the outside world, it had meant building a respectable career and family while secretly hunting women. The contradiction between Murphy's prison behavior and his criminal actions haunted those who studied him. How could the same man who followed every rule in Arbor Hill be responsible for such savage attacks outside its walls? The answer lay in the nature of organized predators. They compartmentalize. They separate their public face from their private desires. They are capable of tremendous self-control, which makes them all the more dangerous when that control is finally released. As the years of Murphy's sentence passed, the families of the missing women watched with growing dread. Irish law provided for early release based on good behavior, and Murphy's prison record was spotless. They knew that someday, probably sooner than the original sentence suggested, this monster would walk free. And they knew that they would have no more answers then than they did now. The prospect of Murphy's release galvanized the families and their supporters. They lobbied the Irish government for reforms that would allow for longer sentences for crimes like Murphy's. They pushed for enhanced supervision of released sex offenders. And they demanded that everything possible be done to prevent Murphy from harming anyone else. Some of their advocacy bore fruit. Ireland strengthened its sex offender registry and notification requirements. Post-release supervision became more robust. The case served as a catalyst for reforms that would help protect future potential victims. But none of these reforms could undo what had already happened. None of them could bring back the missing women. None of them could force Larry Murphy to reveal his secrets. The families were left to wait, to hope, and to fear what might happen when his prison doors finally opened. I think about these families often when I research cases like this. Their strength amazes me, their persistence inspires me, but I also wonder how they managed to carry such a burden for so long. The human capacity for endurance in the face of unbearable loss is something I will never fully comprehend, but I am grateful that it exists, because without the family's advocacy, without their refusal to let their loved ones be forgotten, cases like this fade from public consciousness. The media moves on to the next story. The authorities shift their resources to newer cases. The missing become statistics rather than people. It is only through the tireless efforts of those left behind that the search continues, that pressure remains on investigators, that the hope of resolution stays alive. The families of Ireland's missing women have never given up. Even now, decades after their loved ones vanished, they continue to search. They continue to speak out. They continue to believe that someday, somehow, the truth will emerge. Their faith in justice, despite everything they've endured, is both humbling and heartbreaking. And as you'll see in the chapters to come, their faith was not entirely misplaced. To truly understand the horror of Larry Murphy, we need to examine how he managed to escape detection for so long. This wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the result of a carefully constructed double life that fooled everyone who thought they knew him. Murphy's wife married him, believing she was getting a hard-working, decent man. She raised children with him, built a home with him, planned a future with him. When his true nature was finally exposed, she faced a devastating reckoning. Every memory she had of their life together was now contaminated by the knowledge of who he really was. Every moment of tenderness, every shared experience, every promise of loyalty was revealed as a lie. I cannot imagine the particular kind of hell that comes from discovering your spouse is a monster. The victim of Murphy's final attack had her life destroyed in one terrible night. Murphy's wife had her entire history with him destroyed, years of her life revealed as a fiction. Both are victims, in different ways, of the same predator. The children Murphy fathered face their own lifelong burden. Through no fault of their own, they carry his name and his blood. They must navigate a world where their father is synonymous with evil. Some children of notorious criminals have spoken publicly about this experience, describing the shame, the fear of inheriting their parents' worst qualities, the constant question of whether the darkness is somehow in them too. I mention Murphy's family not to generate sympathy for him, because he deserves none, but to illustrate the full scope of his destruction. When we count victims, we often focus only on those directly harmed by criminal acts. But the ripples of violence spread much further than that. Murphy's family, his neighbors, his entire community were all victimized by his deception. How did he manage it? How did Larry Murphy maintain his facade for so long? The answer lies in understanding the nature of social camouflage. Murphy was what researchers call a high-functioning psychopath, capable of mimicking normal emotional responses without actually feeling them. He could appear loving to his wife because he had studied what loving behavior looked like and learned to reproduce it. He could seem like a good neighbor because he understood the social expectations and met them perfectly. This mimicry extended to every aspect of his public life. He went to church not out of faith, but because church attendance was expected in his community. He participated in local events, not out of genuine interest, but because participation was what normal people did. His entire existence was a performance, a role he played with such skill that no one suspected the emptiness behind the mask. The scariest thing about Larry Murphy wasn't his violence, though that was horrific enough. It was his normality. There were no warning signs, no obvious red flags, nothing that would have told the people around him to be afraid. He was the ultimate example of the monster next door, the predator who looks exactly like everyone else. This is why his case continues to terrify people more than 2 decades later. If Murphy could fool everyone who knew him, if he could hide in plain sight for years while committing unspeakable acts, then how many other monsters might be doing the same thing right now? How many smiling neighbors, trusted colleagues, and helpful acquaintances are concealing the same kind of darkness? The FBI estimates that there are between 25 and 50 active serial killers operating in the United States at any given time. Most of them are never caught. They live normal lives, hold down jobs, raise families, and kill when the opportunity presents itself. The same is almost certainly true in other countries, including Ireland. Larry Murphy is not an anomaly. He is a representative of a category, a type of predator that exists in every society and every era. What made him unusual was only that he was caught. For years before that night in February 2001, he operated with complete impunity. And if not for the miraculous intervention of 2 hunters in the Wicklow Gap, he might still be operating today. The women of Ireland's southeast modified their behavior after Murphy's case became public. Hitchhiking, once common in rural areas, became much less so. Women were more cautious about traveling alone, more suspicious of strangers offering help, more aware of the dangers that might lurk on lonely roads. This change in behavior represents both a victory and a defeat. On one hand, increased awareness may have prevented other attacks, may have saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. On the other hand, the need for such vigilance is itself a kind of defeat. The freedom that Irish women once took for granted was stolen by Larry Murphy and predators like him. They now move through the world with an awareness of danger that they shouldn't have to carry. I find myself thinking about this trade-off often. Is the loss of innocence worth the increase in safety? Is awareness of danger a burden or a protection? There are no easy answers to these questions, but they're worth asking because they get to the heart of how we live in a world where Larry Murphys exist. The investigation into Murphy's background continued throughout his imprisonment. Detectives interviewed people who had known him at various stages of his life, trying to identify any signs they might have missed, any behaviors that in hindsight should have raised concerns. Some witnesses reported that Murphy could be cold and distant, particularly with women. Others remembered moments when his charm seemed forced. his smile not quite reaching his eyes. These observations, filtered through the knowledge of his crimes, took on new significance. But at the time they occurred, they hadn't seemed like warning signs. They had just seemed like personality quirks, the kind of minor oddities everyone has. This is the insidious reality of psychopathic concealment. The red flags are only visible in retrospect. At the time, they're easily explained away, rationalized as stress or shyness or simple eccentricity. It takes a dramatic event, like Murphy's capture in the act of attempted murder, to strip away the rationalizations and reveal the truth. Murphy's prison years were a time of intensive study by criminal psychologists. They wanted to understand how he operated, what drove him, and most importantly, whether he could be rehabilitated. The conclusions they reached were troubling. Murphy showed no remorse for his crimes. He expressed no empathy for his victim. He demonstrated no understanding of the harm he had caused. These are not characteristics that respond to rehabilitation efforts. These are fixed features of a personality type that cannot be changed by therapy, medication, or punishment. The experts concluded that Larry Murphy would remain dangerous for the rest of his life. His desires, whatever dark impulses drove him to attack women, were not going away. His skills at concealment, honed over decades, were not diminishing. If released, he would be exactly as dangerous as he had been before his imprisonment, perhaps more so due to bitterness over his capture and conviction. This assessment haunted the families of the missing women. They knew that someday Larry Murphy would be released. They knew that he would return to the free world with his secrets intact, his victims still unfound, and his capacity for violence unchanged. And they knew that the system that had caught him would have no way to hold him forever. August 12, 2010. The date that Ireland had dreaded for nearly a decade. Larry Murphy walked out of prison after serving just over 9 years of his 15-year sentence, having earned early release through good behavior. He was met not by family or friends, but by a media firestorm and a nation united in outrage. And the scenes outside the prison that day captured everything twisted about the situation. Journalists shouted questions that Murphy ignored. Protesters held signs demanding that he reveal what he knew about the missing women. Gardaí escorts tried to shepherd him through the chaos, aware that feelings were running high enough to pose a real danger. Murphy's face was impassive throughout. He showed no emotion, no acknowledgement of the fury directed at him, no hint of what he was thinking or feeling. He simply walked, surrounded by guards, toward a waiting vehicle that would take him away from the prison and toward whatever new life awaited him. The families of the missing women watched through their television screens, hoping against hope that Murphy might say something, might give some indication that answers would finally come. Instead, they saw only cold silence, the same wall of nothingness that had protected his secrets for so long. The Irish government had prepared for this moment as best it could. Murphy would be subject to post-release supervision, required to register as a sex offender, monitored by authorities for signs of reoffending. But everyone knew these measures were limited. Murphy wasn't under house arrest. He wasn't prevented from traveling. He wasn't required to answer questions about his past. The public reaction to Murphy's release was unlike anything Ireland had seen before. His face was on every newspaper, every news broadcast, every conversation in every pub and kitchen in the country. People who had never heard of him before his release quickly learned his story and joined the chorus of those demanding answers. This public pressure had an unexpected effect. Murphy found that his notoriety made normal life impossible. Everywhere he went, he was recognized. No landlord would rent to him. No employer would hire him. His presence in any community was met with protests and threats. The mask of normalcy that had served him so well for so long was now useless. Everyone knew exactly what he was. Within weeks of his release, reports began circulating that Murphy had left Ireland entirely. He was spotted in various European countries, apparently moving frequently to stay ahead of the attention that followed him. For the families of the missing women, this was bittersweet news. On one hand, Murphy was no longer walking among them, no longer a daily reminder of their loss. On the other hand, his flight meant he was even further from answering their questions. The years following Murphy's release saw continued efforts to connect him to the missing women cases. Advances in forensic technology offered new hope. DNA techniques that hadn't existed in the 1990s might now be able to establish connections that were previously impossible to prove. Cold case units reviewed the files with fresh eyes, looking for anything that might have been missed. Some progress was made. In 2020, a man named Trevor Dealey was finally officially listed as presumed dead 20 years after his disappearance. While Dealey was male and didn't fit Murphy's known victim profile, his case was investigated alongside the women's disappearances as part of the broader review. More significantly, investigators announced that they believed they had identified a suspect in the case of Deirdre Jacob, the 18-year-old who had vanished in broad daylight in 1998. While no public identification was made and no charges were filed, the announcement suggested that the cold case investigations were producing results. The families greeted each development with cautious hope. They had been disappointed too many times to allow themselves to believe that resolution was imminent. But they also recognized that the world had changed since their loved ones disappeared. Technology had evolved. Investigative techniques had improved. Public attention to cold cases had increased dramatically thanks to podcasts, documentaries, and social media campaigns. Larry Murphy remained abroad for years, effectively in exile from his homeland. Reports placed him in Spain, in the Netherlands, in England, never staying in one place for long. Apparently unable to rebuild the life of anonymity he had enjoyed before his crimes became public. For some observers, this exile represented a form of justice that the legal system hadn't been able to deliver. Murphy was free technically, but his freedom was hollow. He couldn't go home. He couldn't reconnect with family. He couldn't work or socialize or participate in society the way he once had. His life had become a kind of prison without bars. But for the families of the missing women, Murphy's exile was cold comfort. Their loved ones were still gone. Murphy's whereabouts were interesting, but not as interesting as the whereabouts of the bodies he had presumably hidden somewhere in the Irish countryside. Every day that he remained silent was another day of torment for those waiting for answers. The survivor of Murphy's final attack also had to find a way to rebuild her life. She had done something extraordinary in fighting back, in surviving long enough for rescue to arrive, in providing the testimony that put Murphy behind bars. But survival is only the first step in a long journey of healing. I don't know the details of her life after the attack, because she has deliberately stayed out of public view. This is entirely appropriate, and I respect her privacy completely. What I can say is that survivors of violent attacks face ongoing challenges that most people don't understand. The trauma doesn't end when the physical wounds heal. It lives on in nightmares, in triggers, in the way the world suddenly seems unsafe. But this woman's survival meant something beyond her own personal recovery. Her testimony ensured that Larry Murphy was exposed, that his hunting days were over, that whatever else happened, he would never again operate in the shadows. She saved not just herself, but every potential future victim who might otherwise have encountered Murphy on a lonely road. This is the strange arithmetic of survival. By living, she prevented others from dying. By speaking, she gave voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. Her courage in that terrible night and in the courtroom that followed made her a champion for victims she would never meet. For 20 years, the families of Ireland's missing women lived in limbo. They had their suspicions about Larry Murphy, shared by investigators and the public alike. But suspicions are not proof. And they needed answers, and the only person who could provide them refused to speak. Then, in 2021, something remarkable happened. Investigators announced a major development in the case of Deirdre Jacob, the young woman who had vanished in 1998 while walking home in broad daylight. After decades of investigation, after exhaustive review of old evidence with new forensic techniques, after following up on countless tips and leads, they had enough evidence to officially name a suspect. The suspect's identity was not released to the public, but the implications were clear to anyone following the case. The location of Deirdre's disappearance, the profile of the suspected offender, the timing of the attack, all pointed toward the possibility that Larry Murphy's crimes extended far beyond what he had been convicted of. For the Jacob family, this announcement was a validation of what they had believed for so long. Someone was finally being held accountable, at least in the court of public opinion, for what had happened to their daughter. The long years of waiting had not been in vain. But the announcement also raised difficult questions. Why had it taken so long? What evidence had been available all along that might have led to this conclusion earlier? Were there opportunities to catch the killer sooner that had been missed? These questions are not meant to criticize the investigators who worked tirelessly on the case. They are simply an acknowledgement that the passage of time carries its own cruelty. Every year that a case remains unsolved is another year of anguish for the family, another year of freedom for the perpetrator, another year of lost possibilities. But the investigation into the missing women cases continues to this day. Detectives who were young officers when these women disappeared are now senior investigators, having spent their entire careers pursuing answers. They have never given up, never moved on to other priorities, never stopped believing that the truth could be found. And slowly, painstakingly, the truth is emerging. I want to be clear about something. As of my knowledge cutoff, Larry Murphy has not been charged with any crimes beyond those he was convicted of in 2001. The connections between him and the missing women remain circumstantial, based on geography, timing, and victim profile rather than physical evidence or confession. But the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Murphy was active in the exact areas where these women disappeared. His known crime demonstrated capabilities consistent with what happened to them. His silence, which could be innocent if he truly knew nothing, takes on sinister meaning in the context of everything else. The families have drawn their own conclusions. Many of them believe they know exactly what happened to their loved ones, even if they cannot prove it in court. This belief gives them a framework for understanding their loss, a narrative that makes sense of the senseless. Whether it is accurate in every detail is almost beside the point. It is what allows them to continue living. And now, as forensic technology continues to advance, as cold case investigators continue their work, as public attention remains focused on these decades-old disappearances, the possibility of definitive answers grows stronger every year. And the Irish landscape that concealed so many secrets is slowly giving them up. Advances in ground-penetrating radar and DNA analysis mean that evidence that was hidden in the 1990s might be discoverable today. Tips that led nowhere 20 years ago might be more valuable with modern investigative tools. I believe that someday, probably within my lifetime, we will know the full truth about what Larry Murphy did. We will know how many women he killed, where he hid their bodies, and why he chose them as his victims. The families who have waited so long will finally have the closure they deserve. And when that day comes, it will be because of their persistence. It will be because they refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. It will be because they kept pressure on investigators, kept the cases in public consciousness, kept demanding answers until answers were found. This is the power of memory, of refusal, of love that transcends even death. The families of Ireland's missing women have demonstrated something profound about the human spirit. They have shown that evil, no matter how powerful it seems, cannot extinguish the light of those who oppose it. Larry Murphy believed he could make women disappear forever. He believed their stories would end with their deaths, that no one would remember them, that he would have the final word. He was wrong. Their stories continue, told by families who love them, by investigators who seek justice, by people like me who share their stories with the world. While the investigation into Larry Murphy's past crimes continued, the woman he had attacked in February 2001 was writing her own story of survival and triumph. I cannot share the specific details of her journey because she has chosen privacy, and that choice deserves absolute respect. But I can speak to the broader truth of what survivors of violence accomplish when they refuse to be defined by what happened to them. Survival is not a single event. It is an ongoing process that continues long after the immediate danger has passed. The woman Murphy attacked had to rebuild her sense of safety in a world that had shown her its darkest face. She had to reclaim her body, her autonomy, her right to exist without fear. Every day of her recovery was an act of defiance against the man who had tried to destroy her. I think about her often when I hear people speak casually about violence, as if it's something that happens in movies or to other people. For this woman, violence was the most real thing in the world, a defining moment that reshaped everything that came after. Her healing required confronting that reality again and again, processing it, integrating it, and ultimately transcending it. The human capacity for healing is one of the great mysteries of our existence. Wounds that seem fatal to the spirit somehow close. Traumas that seem permanently disabling somehow become manageable. People who seem broken beyond repair somehow put themselves back together and move forward. This woman did all of that. She survived the attack. She survived the investigation. She survived the trial where she had to face Murphy and recount in detail what he had done to her. She survived the aftermath, the media attention, the public curiosity, the endless questions. And she emerged from all of it not as a victim, but as a victor. Her victory is not measured in headlines or public recognition. It is measured in the quiet achievements of a life reclaimed. Every peaceful night of sleep, every relationship built on trust, every moment of joy that Murphy tried to steal from her forever. These are her trophies, even if no one but she knows about them. And her victory extends beyond her personal recovery. By surviving and testifying, she ensured that Larry Murphy could never hunt again. Every woman who didn't become his victim because he was in prison has her to thank. Every family that didn't suffer her fate has her to thank. Her courage in fighting back, in staying alive until help arrived, saved lives that she will never know about. This is the arithmetic of survival that I mentioned earlier. One woman's refusal to die quietly rippled outward through time and space, affecting countless others who will never know her name. The butterfly effect of her bravery continues to this day. I want to speak now about the hunters who saved her life that night. Trevor Moody and Kenneth Jones were ordinary men who found themselves in an extraordinary situation. They could have ignored what they saw in the darkness of the Wicklow Gap. They could have convinced themselves it was none of their business, that getting involved was too dangerous, that someone else would handle it. Instead, they acted. Kenneth Jones chased Murphy into the woods and brought him down. Trevor Moody freed the victim and called for help. Their split-second decisions changed everything. If they had hesitated, if they had looked the other way, if they had simply driven past, a woman would have died and a predator would have remained free. We often talk about heroes as if they're a special category of humanity different from the rest of us. But Trevor Moody and Kenneth Jones were not special in that way. They were hunters out on a routine trip, looking for foxes, expecting nothing more dramatic than a cold night in the country. Their heroism emerged not from some pre-existing exceptional quality, but from a choice made in the moment. This is perhaps the most important lesson of this story. Any of us can be heroes if we choose to be. The opportunity might come when we least expect it, in a form we don't recognize, at a time when we'd rather be doing something else. But if we make the right choice in that moment, we can change everything. I don't know what happened to Trevor Moody and Kenneth Jones in the years after that night. They testified at Murphy's trial and then faded from public view, as heroes often do, but their actions continue to resonate. Every time this story is told, their courage is honored. Every time people hear about what happened in the Wicklow Gap, they learn that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Larry Murphy is still alive as I record this narration. He would be in his late 50s now, still in exile from Ireland, still bearing the weight of crimes both convicted and suspected. His freedom, such as it is, has been a prison of a different kind. He cannot escape his identity, cannot rebuild the mask of normalcy, cannot ever again walk unrecognized through the world. This is a form of justice, though perhaps not the form the families of the missing women would have chosen. Murphy never confessed. He never led investigators to bodies. He never gave the families the closure they deserved. In his silence, he has continued to victimize them every day since his capture. But he has not escaped consequences entirely. His life has been destroyed as surely as he destroyed others' lives. His family has disowned him. His community has rejected him. His country has expelled him. He exists now as a pariah, known everywhere as a monster, stripped of everything that once made his life bearable. And the investigation continues. Forensic technology advances every year. Evidence that was useless in the 1990s might be decisive today. Bodies that were hidden decades ago might be found with modern tools. The truth that Murphy has guarded so jealously might yet be dragged into the light. I believe that day will come. I believe that the families of the missing women will eventually receive the answers they have sought for so long. I believe that the full accounting of Larry Murphy's crimes will someday be known, whether through confession, investigation, or the ultimate justice that awaits us all. And when that day comes, the women he tried to erase from existence will finally receive proper memorials. Annie McCarrick, Jo Dullard, Fiona Pender, Ciara Breen, Fiona Sinnott, Deirdre Jacob, and any others whose names we do not yet know, they will be laid to rest with dignity. Their families will be able to grieve properly, to let go of the endless hope that tortures them, to find peace at last. This is the victory I promised you at the beginning of this story. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a spectacular revenge, but something quieter and more profound. The victory is in the survival of Murphy's last intended victim. The victory is in the persistence of the families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten. The victory is in the ongoing investigation that inches closer to the truth every day. The victory is in the telling of this story, which ensures that Larry Murphy will never be allowed to fade into comfortable anonymity. Some monsters win, at least in the short term. Larry Murphy operated with impunity for years, took lives without consequence, and served less than a decade in prison for attempted murder. That's not the kind of justice any of us would design if we were starting from scratch. But monsters don't win forever. Larry Murphy's hunting days ended in the Wicklow Gap, when one woman fought back and two men intervened. His life of respectability ended when his crimes became public knowledge. His future ended when every door in every country closed against him. And the women he tried to silence continue to speak. Their families tell their stories. Investigators pursue their cases. Documentaries and podcasts and narrations like this one keep their memories alive. They were supposed to be forgotten, erased, made to disappear. Instead, they have become more present than ever, their names known across Ireland and beyond, their fates a cause that has united thousands. This is the triumph of memory over evil. This is the power of refusal to accept defeat. This is what happens when good people refuse to let bad people have the last word. Larry Murphy lost. He just hasn't realized it yet. And someday, when the final truth emerges, when the last body is found, when the full weight of his crimes is finally known, the world will see just how completely he failed. He wanted to be a shadow, unseen and unstoppable. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when society pays attention, when survivors fight back, when ordinary people choose to be heroes. The women of Ireland walk safer today because of what happened to Larry Murphy. Not safe because that kind of safety is an illusion, but safer. They are more aware, more cautious, more willing to look out for each other. The roads Murphy once hunted are now watched more carefully, traveled more cautiously, understood as places where danger might lurk. And somewhere, in whatever exile Larry Murphy has found for himself, he knows all of this. He knows that his life is over in every way that matters. He knows that he will never hunt again, never feel the power he once craved, never escape the identity that follows him everywhere. He knows that his victims, both those he killed and those he tried to kill, have ultimately defeated him. This is the ending I promised you. Not a dramatic execution or a tearful confession, but something better. The slow, inexorable triumph of truth over lies, of memory over forgetting, of life over death. Larry Murphy tried to make women disappear. Instead, he made himself disappear, fading into an exile from which there is no return. The women he attacked, whether they survived or not, remain vivid in our memories. Their names are spoken, their stories are told. Their lives, cut short or forever altered, continue to matter. That is the final victory. That is the redemption that this story offers. Not for Murphy, who deserves none, but for his victims and their families, who deserve everything. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think differently about the world and the people in it, I ask you to share it. Not for me, not for my channel, but for the women whose names I've spoken and the families who continue to seek answers. Share this story so that they are not forgotten. Share it so that other potential victims might be warned. Share it so that other predators know that the world is watching. And remember, in a world where Larry Murphys exist, we are all responsible for each other. The hunters who saved that woman's life in the Wicklow Gap did what any of us should do. They saw something wrong and they acted. They didn't look away. They didn't convince themselves it wasn't their problem. They got involved and a woman lived. Be like Trevor Moody and Kenneth Jones. Be the person who sees and acts. Be the one who refuses to let evil win. That is the lesson of Larry Murphy. That is the victory we can all claim. The hunter in the woods was caught at last, and the woods are watching now, waiting for any others who might follow in his footsteps. They won't escape either.